This first story comes from a viewer named Emily, who asked to remain anonymous. She swears this happened to her in 2023, exactly 28 years after an incident she thought she'd left behind. When I was 10 years old, back in 1995, my family lived in a small town in Ohio. Our house was old, built in the early 1900s with creaky floors and windows that never quite shut right. It wasn't much, but it was home. My bedroom was on the second floor overlooking the backyard, which was just a patch of grass bordered by a dense forest. At night, I'd lie in bed and stare out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. Sometimes I'd get this weird feeling, like something in the forest was watching me, not just looking, but studying me. I told my parents, but they brushed it off as a kid's overactive imagination. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of tapping on my window. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, like someone was deliberately knocking. I froze in bed, my heart pounding. My room was pitch black except for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. I told myself it was just a branch, but the tapping didn't stop. It got louder, more insistent. I worked up the courage to peek through the curtains, expecting to see a tree branch or maybe an animal. There was nothing there, just the empty backyard and the dark wall of trees. But the tapping continued, now coming from inside the room, like it was on the wall behind my bed. I screamed and my parents rushed in, flipping on the light. The tapping stopped instantly. They checked the room, the window, even the backyard, but found nothing. My dad said I must have been dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. After that night, I started sleeping with the curtains closed and a nightlight on. A few weeks later, something worse happened. I was home alone after school, doing homework in the living room. It was late afternoon, still light outside. I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy and deliberate, like someone walking across my bedroom floor. I froze, listening as the steps moved from one end of the room to the other, then stopped. I grabbed the phone to call my mom, but before I could dial, I heard a voice, a low, guttural whisper, coming from the top of the stairs. It said my name. Emily. Just once. Clear as day. I dropped the phone and ran out of the house, waiting on the porch until my parents got home. I never heard the voice again, but I refused to sleep in that room after that. We moved out of that house a year later, in 1996, and I tried to forget about it. Life moved on. I went to college, got a job, and started a family. But in 2023, 28 years later, I had to go back. My mom passed away and my dad needed help clearing out the old house, which they'd kept as a rental property. I hadn't been back since I was 11, and just pulling into the driveway made my stomach churn. The house looked the same, just older. Peeling paint, overgrown weeds, and that same dark forest looming in the back. We spent the day sorting through boxes, but I avoided my old bedroom. It was locked, which I thought was odd, but my dad said the last tenants used it for storage. That night, I stayed over to help finish up. My dad was downstairs and I was in the kitchen when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from upstairs, from the direction of my old room. My blood ran cold. I told myself it was just the house settling, but the tapping grew louder, more rhythmic, just like it had 28 years ago. I didn't want to go up there, but I had to know. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs, my hands shaking. The tapping stopped as I reached the second floor. The door to my old bedroom was still locked, but I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Scratch marks around the keyhole, like someone or something had tried to claw its way out. I called my dad and we got the door open with a spare key. The room was empty except for a few dusty boxes, but the air felt heavy, like someone was standing right behind me. I shone the flashlight around, and that's when I saw it. On the wall behind where my bed used to be, there were words carved into the wood, jagged and uneven, like they'd been scratched with a knife. They read, "I see you, Emily." My dad went pale, swearing he'd never seen it before. We checked the boxes, thinking maybe a tenant did it, but they were just old clothes and books. No one had lived in the house for months. I don't know what was in that house, but it knew my name, and it remembered me after 28 years. We sold the place a month later, and I've never gone back. But sometimes at night, I still feel like something's watching me, This next story was sent in by a viewer named Marcus from Texas. He says this happened in 2024, and it's one of the creepiest things he's ever experienced. Back in 1996, I was 15, living in a small town outside Houston. My best friend Jake and I were inseparable. We'd spend our summers biking around, exploring abandoned lots, and causing harmless trouble. One day we found an old mailbox in the woods near our neighborhood. It was rusted, half buried in the dirt, like it hadn't been used in years. The box was locked, but there was a slit for letters, and Jake, being the troublemaker, dared me to write something and stick it in there. I laughed it off, but went along with it. I wrote a stupid note on a scrap of paper. To whoever finds this, you're cursed now. Sorry. I signed it with my initials, MT, and slipped it into the mailbox. Jake thought it was hilarious, and we forgot about it. A few weeks later, though, things got weird. I started getting these feelings like someone was following me. I'd be biking home at dusk and hear footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. Jake said he felt it too, but we chalked it up to our imaginations. Then one night, I found an envelope under my bedroom door. It was old, yellowed, with no stamp or address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was my note, the same one I'd put in the mailbox. The words were the same, but my initials were crossed out in red ink, replaced with the words, "You're mine." I showed Jake, and he freaked out, swearing he didn't do it. We burned the note and tried to forget it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd messed with something we shouldn't have. Life went on, and I moved away for college. Jake stayed in town but got into some bad stuff. Drugs, mostly. And we lost touch. I built a life in Austin, got married, and hadn't thought about that note in years. But in 2024, 28 years later, I got a call from my mom. She was cleaning out her attic and found a box of my old stuff from high school. She mentioned an envelope with my name on it, no address, just sitting among my things. My heart sank. I told her to open it. She read the note over the phone, her voice trembling. It was the same note. To whoever finds this, you're cursed now. Sorry. My initials were crossed out again, but this time the red ink said, I'm still here. I told her to burn it, but she said it was too creepy and mailed it to me instead. When it arrived, I noticed something new. A faint smell, like damp earth, and a smudge of what looked like blood on the corner. I tried to find Jake to see if he'd gotten anything similar. After some digging, I learned he'd passed away in 2020, an overdose. But his sister told me something that made my blood run cold. A few days before he died, Jake had called her, panicked, saying he kept finding old notes in his apartment. Notes he swore he'd burned years ago. He said something was following him, something from those woods. I went back to our old town to find that mailbox. The woods had been partially cleared for a new development, but the mailbox was still there, rusted but standing. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to open it. Inside was a single piece of paper, fresh, like it had been placed there yesterday. It said, "You can't leave me, Marcus." I burned it on the spot and haven't been back since. But every now and then, I find scraps of paper in my house, under the couch, in my car, with no writing, just that same damp, earthy smell. This happened in 2022. It's a chilling reminder that some truths take years to come to light. In 1994, I was 12, growing up in a rural part of Oregon. My dad was a park ranger, so we lived near a state forest. I loved exploring the trails with my Polaroid camera, taking pictures of trees, animals, anything that caught my eye. One summer day, I went deeper into the forest than usual, following a path I'd never taken. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just an eerie stillness. I took a few photos, including one of a clearing with a weird rock formation that looked almost like a face. When I got home, I spread the Polaroids on my bed to watch them develop. Most were normal, trees, a squirrel, the trail, but the one of the clearing was off. In the background, behind the rock formation, there was a man. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and his face was blurry, like he'd moved just as I took the shot. I didn't remember seeing anyone out there. I showed my dad and he said it was probably a hiker, but he looked uneasy. He told me to stay out of that part of the forest. A few days later, I heard my parents talking late at night. My dad mentioned a missing hiker case from a few years back, someone who'd vanished in that same forest. The police had found nothing, no body, no trace. I didn't connect it to my photo at the time. I was just a kid, but I stopped going into the forest after that, and I buried the Polaroid in a shoebox under my bed. Fast forward to 2022, 28 years later. I was visiting my parents to help them downsize for a move. While sorting through my old stuff, I found that shoebox. The Polaroid was still there, faded but intact. The man in the background looked clearer now, almost like the photo had developed more over time, which I know sounds impossible. His face wasn't blurry anymore. It was pale, with dark, sunken eyes, staring straight at the camera. I felt sick looking at it. I showed it to my dad, who was retired by then. He went quiet, then told me something he'd never shared before. Back in 1994, after I showed him the photo, he'd gone back to that clearing with another ranger. They found the rock formation, but also something else. A small pile of bones, human bones, hidden under leaves. The police identified them as the missing hiker from years earlier, but the case was never solved. My dad had kept it from me to protect me. I couldn't let it go. I contacted a local historian who'd written about unsolved cases in the area. She told me about a man who'd lived near the forest in the 1980s, a recluse suspected of being involved in several disappearances, but never charged. He died in 1993, a year before my photo. She sent me an old newspaper clipping with his picture. It was him, the man in my Polaroid. Same coat, same pale face, same empty eyes. I don't know how he was in that photo, taken a year after his death. I don't know why he was looking at me, but I burned the Polaroid and prayed that was the end of it. Last month, though, I got an email from an unknown address. No text, just an attachment, a grainy scan of a Polaroid, showing me, 12 years old, standing in that clearing, with him behind me, closer than he was in the original. Those were 3 true scary stories that happened 28 years later. If these creeped you out, let me know in the comments which one was the scariest. And if you've got a story that's come back to haunt you after years, send it to my email in the description. I'd love to feature it in a future video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.